friends, welcome back to World Maker Books. I'm Joy, and we're going to continue with a reading of Black and White by Mark Wandrey. We are currently in part 3, and we will be reading today chapters 2, 3, and 4. Chapter 2, Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Tolo Arm, January 13th, 2038. Life gradually got better in the habitat as more and more systems were made operational. The mechanical team under Melissa spent less time racing between urgent jobs and more time concentrating on long-term goals. The temperature and humidity settled into something more to the liking of the staff, who'd spent many years in Hawaii. The orcas never found Shul, which was no surprise to their human wardens. They also never stopped looking. Terry thought they were incredibly patient. If anything, they seemed more convinced Shul was out there somewhere. Maybe Shul is beyond, the bottlenose hula suggested one day. Again with hyperspace, Terry thought. What do the orcas think of that idea? Terry asked her. They say we crazy. School wasn't as lame as Terry had feared it would be. As one of the 12 kids who were high school aged, they were largely self-paced in their studies. He was assigned objectives and could complete them as quickly as he wished. He also got to work on his pin plant research and got credit for that as well, which was cool. Despite missing Yui, he found himself making friends. He only recognized one of the boys from his age group. They'd played on different summer baseball teams. They all seemed to know him. Suddenly he was the cool kid, and he had absolutely no idea why. Some of the things they got to do was help out around the habitat on work projects. The air was no longer filled with the smell of rotting fish, but a lot of junk had been left behind by the Selroth when they'd abandoned the place. Tons of it, actually. First, the kids helped gather it in assigned areas. Next, they helped clean, which wasn't as fun. Then they initiated a beautification project, which meant painting. The Selroth hadn't bothered with anything more than priming the metal buildings. Compared to the big ruby dome, the rest of the place was lame. The adults handled the majority of the painting project because some heavy equipment was involved. Where the kids got involved was putting up murals on some of the building's larger walls. By the end of the second week, a dozen different designs were coming to life. The high schooler's mural was on the side of the CC building, a stylized habitat inside its ruby dome with orcas and dolphins playing outside. Reminds me of that Captain Nemo movie, someone said. A short time later, the movie in question was located. Captain Nemo and the Underwater City. Along with exabytes of data from Earth, they also had thousands of movies. The one in question was included. The same evening after dinner, a new tradition was born. Movie night. Some popcorn was produced, and the auto chef made soda pop and candy for the kids. The main administration building still had a 4-story wall painted white, and the movie was projected on the wall. Terry found the special effects of mid-20th century laughable, as you might imagine they would be. Still, having nearly the entire group together sharing snacks and watching the film together was a fun experience. Doc and his mom sat on either side of him, and he pretended not to notice when they held hands behind his chair. It felt good. Hey, Doc said, about halfway through the movie. A giant manta ray was menacing a submarine. I think we have the name of this place. What's that? Terry's mom asked. The view on the screen changed to show the underwater city. Sure enough, it looked a lot like what Terry and his fellow high schoolers were painting. Templemere, he said. It was pronounced Temple-mere. She looked at him, then slowly nodded. I like it, she said. Not as pretentious as Atlantis would have been. Terry had heard a few people joking about living in Atlantis. He had to think what would make Atlantis pretentious. Unable to figure it out, he decided he liked Templemere. I think it's a great idea, he said. By the next morning, everyone was calling their home Templemere. The head doctors voted on it later, but there was really no need. They could have called it Mount Olympus, and everyone would have kept calling it Templemere. Their home had a name. The next morning was the 13th, and a big day. All the head doctors met Terry in the moon pool, where Pokale was swimming excitedly around and around. Outside the lock, his pod floated, watching and waiting. Moloko was front and center. Terry was already wearing his dry suit, as were his mother and Dr. Janig. Both of them were already in the water trying to corral Pokale. Can you help? His mother asked in frustration. The little guy's all worked up. Just excited about the big day, Terry said. How would he know? Dr. Orsage asked. The calf is only 7 months old. Oh, he knows, Terry assured her. His mom wants him to get the pin plants now. We've been over this, Dr. Janig said. We want to make sure the calf is acclimated to hoarfrost before undergoing the procedure. I know, Terry said, grabbing a rebreather and sliding into the water. Explain it to them. He pointed out through the lock where the 4 massive orcas were watching intently. Terry smacked the water several times. Come on, Pokale, he said gently. The baby orca, who was already 3 meters long and over 500 kilograms, spun around and shot toward Terry. His mother gasped in alarm. Terry turned sideways and reached out with a hand, catching the orca's dorsal fin as it slipped by, allowing himself to be propelled along with the powerful strokes of the calf's flukes. "Attaboy!" Terry cried, smacking the young orca's side affectionately. "You know what's going on, don't you?" The orca slipped out of Terry's grasp, dove down, then shot straight up. Not quite managing to clear the water, he crashed down on his side with a huge wave. It was a pretty good approximation of the adult cetacean's spy-hopping, a behavior meant to get a look around the surface. "Wow," Dr. Hernandez said. "Indeed," Dr. Patel agreed. The calf calmed and allowed Terry's mom and Dr. Janig to come closer. He rolled on his side and looked at them with one of his big eyes. "He's thrived," Dr. Janig said, slipping a stethoscope against Pokelay's middle. "Thanks to you, of course." "He's strong and smart," Terry said. "I just gave him some love." He looked at his mom and winked. She beamed in reply. "Should I feed him real quick before he goes out, in case he doesn't come back for a bit?" "Good idea," his mom said. Dr. Hernandez went over and got a bottle from the holding rack and brought it to Terry. It took him a couple of tries to get the calf to eat. He was too excited. However, eventually food won out. The orcas outside continued to watch patiently. Every few minutes a plume of bubbles would expel from their rebreather domes. The timing was good. The rebreathers would need new power cells within a couple of days. The nearest breathable air for the orcas was 2 kilometers straight up, a trip none of them would survive if they did it in less than a week to allow for decompression. Pokelay only drank half of the 15-liter bottle before he wouldn't sit still anymore. "Good enough," Dr. Janig said. "The little rascal doesn't want to wait." "I can see that," Terry's mom said, as the little orca did a quick lap, then stopped next to the lock. "Goodness, he knows how to get out." "I told you," Terry said. "He's smart." He looked at the controls. "Can I do it?" "Let's double-check pressurization first," she said, and Dr. Orsage walked over to examine the control panel. "Am I late, Madison?" Doc asked. He was standing next to the moon pool entrance. "Right on time," she said. "We're about to open the door." "Pressure is within 20 ksi," Orsage said, well within tolerance of the moon pool. "Okay, Terry," she said and nodded to him. "Go ahead." He grinned widely as he swam over to the lock. It was situated a meter below the surface of the pool. It used the natural pressure of the room to keep water from flooding in when the door was opened. He'd learned how it worked days ago in preparation for this day. He turned the key, bringing a mechanism to life. A horn sounded, then a click as the room's exit locked. If it were open while the outside lock was open, the dome could partially flood. The status light turned blue, meaning all was well. He pressed the open button, labeled with tape in English, and the lock ground into motion. The door was a 6-meter-wide iris valve. It began to cycle like an eye's iris opening wide for a dark room. A stream of water came in from the outside, raising the moon pool's levels a couple centimeters. Then it stopped, the pressure sufficient to keep it where it was. Pokelay looked at Terry as the door opened. "Go ahead," he said, and pointed at the door. "Go see your mom." Pokelay gave a screeching click and flipped over, diving down and rocketing through the door. In an instant, 9 adult orcas surrounded him as he nuzzled up against his mother. The pod was whole again. Terry was grinning from ear to ear when he popped his head out of the water and shook the hair and water out of his eyes. "You're not going out, too?" his mom asked. "I can?" "He's your responsibility," she said. "I think you're half orca by now anyway. We haven't seen anything dangerous, so just be careful." Terry laughed and grabbed his suit helmet from next to the moon pool. It only took a few seconds to connect the power supply and activate the integrated heads-up display. The helmet had its own built-in rebreather, 2 LED lights, and the dry suit's integrated heater worked with it as well. Adding a pair of flippers and gloves completely insulated him from the bitter cold seawater outside. Doc handed him an equalizer belt for buoyancy and a dive knife. He gave Doc and his mom a wave, flipped over, and dove down underwater. After hundreds of hours in the water, he was an incredibly powerful swimmer, and he was through the lock in a couple of seconds. Pokelay swam over and offered his dorsal fin. Terry took it, and he was quickly pulled over next to the other orcas. My God, they're big, he thought. He'd forgotten how much larger they were than Pokelay. Moloko gently brushed him with the dome of her head, and he felt a slight bump as she used her sonar on him. "Thank for care," she said, Terry's translator pendant speaking inside the helmet for him to hear. "Pokelay happy, Pokelay strong." "I'm happy to help. We all love him," Terry said, again his translator booming the orca's reverberating vocalizations through the water. "Thank you for trusting me." "Part of Pod," Cray said. He was Pokelay's father. "Want to fast swim?" "Not this time," he said. He couldn't explain that he wouldn't be able to tolerate the bitterly cold water for long. Despite the dry suit, he was already shivering. "Soon, maybe." "Terry Warden, welcome always," Moloko said. Pokale shoved him playfully, then the entire pod turned and swam away. The all-encompassing darkness of Hoarfrost's ocean swallowed them in seconds. Terry turned to swim back and stopped. Templemere was a shining, multifaceted ruby with 1,000 glittering points of light. He'd never seen it from the outside like this. When they'd come down, it had been completely dark. Honcho had homed in on a solitary sonar beacon. All lit up, it was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. Seeing through to the inside was kind of hard, but he could see his mother waving him back. The cold was really biting, so he swam toward the dome. On the other side of the ruby wall, he could see Doc running toward the moon pool, pulling off his light jacket as he ran. What's he running for? Terry wondered, an instant before something slammed into him and everything went black. Chapter 3. Templemere, Planet Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Tolo Arm, January 13th, 2038. Pain, soul-searing pain, and the relentless rush of icy water over his body was all Terry felt. The headset inside his rebreather helmet screamed in alarm, and the little heads-up display showed his dry suit heater was failing. He felt ice water needles spreading along his back and ripping pain in his side and left leg. What's happening, he thought, struggling to understand. One moment he'd been swimming toward the dome, the next something hit him. Water was rushing past him, and he was bent over backward. Something had his side and leg. He struggled to look down. He was in near absolute darkness, only the 2 wildly spiraling LED lamps in his helmet providing any illumination. A dark mass to his left blocked the light. He turned his head and saw an eye looking at him. His mind cleared with an electric jolt of adrenaline. Something had him in its mouth! For a split second, his darkest fear came to life. One of the orcas had attacked him. Then his pain-fogged mind focused on the eye enough to discern details. It was silvery in color, with a red rim and 2 irises. 2 irises! Selroth native species had 2 irises. It's gotta be an Uhobo, the little part of his brain still working on a logical level thought. None of the other Selroth native carnivorous species were big enough to do more than nibble your toes. The water between him and the huge eye was momentarily tinted red. Blood, more specifically, human blood. Not all aliens have red blood, Doc had pointed out anecdotally during an MST class discussion. It was one of those talks the other teachers back in Molokai wouldn't have approved of, but had the normally bored students on the edge of their seats. He shook his head to clear it. The pain and cold were making him drift. Hundreds of hours of diving with Doc had driven home many lessons. One of them was, when you lost concentration, you were in the most danger. Another was sharks. The predators weren't common in the Hawaiian waters. However, Doc said the smartest thing to do was avoid them. They were usually more scared of you than you were of them, but if they tried to attack, hurt them. He couldn't use his left hand, it was pinned to his side. His right hand was free, and he stretched down. Tearing pain shot through his left side. He screamed and reached anyway, bending his right leg back to meet his hand. Fingers numbed with cold felt something hard, and he wrapped them around the object and pulled it free. His vision was beginning to swim, and water was trickling into the helmet. The seal was failing. Terry fixed his grip on the handle, brought it around, and plunged the dive knife into the eye with a visceral scream and all the strength his 12-year-old, cold-deadened muscles could manage, driving it into the hilt with a chunk. There was an explosion of pain, and he was flung free of the Uhobo's grip. A second later, the pain was mostly gone, replaced by the numbness of extreme cold. His suit's air heater had failed. He shook his head again, trying to clear his vision. The heads-up said the heater was out, buoyancy stability was unresponsive, power was down to 29%, and backup power was automatically tied into rebreather functions. Bad news all around. He looked down, his helmet lights panning over his body, and gasped when he saw his left leg. The suit was torn, and shredded tendrils of flesh floated like ghostly fingers. Despite the training, panic hit him. He tried orienting with kicks of his legs, and the left one wouldn't respond. The panic grew into terror. He swung his head around, searching for the Uhobo. He found it only a few meters away. The monster was easily 10 meters long, longer than an orca, but thinner. It reminded him of an alligator with an overly long mouth full of too many teeth, and 3 sets of flippers instead of limbs. It was shaking its head furiously, trying to dislodge Terry's knife, which was still lodged in the beast's eye. Purple fluid jetted from the wound. As it floundered, it turned onto its right side, and its good eye caught sight of him. Instantly it stopped shaking and locked eyes with him. Despite the pain, the fog in his brain, and the icy cold threatening to consume him, he fought the panic away and prepared himself as best he could. The Uhobo opened its mouth and shot toward him, but blurs of black and white rocketed past him to either side. A pair of 10-ton missiles composed of flesh and bloody vengeance collided with the Uhobo like hurtling freight trains. Brilliant white teeth flashed and tore at the monster. Terry sighed and began to float downward. He feebly tried to correct his orientation to what felt like up and down, but failed. His arms didn't seem to want to follow his instructions. Traitors, he thought. The heads-up display said power was 0, all systems failing. Something warmer than the water, a huge soft pillow with dull pointy edges, gently engulfed him, and he felt the icy water begin to rush past. "Have you?" he heard. "Safe." "I'm already dead," he whispered, and the darkness took him. Chapter 4. Templemere, Planet Hoarfrost, Lupasha System, Koro Region, Toloarm, March 19th, 2038. Must wake. Leave me alone. Must wake or die. I'm already dead. Leave me alone. Not dead, but be dead if not wake. He struggled up a little, and the pain tore at him. No, it hurts. All life hurt. Life better than die. Hurt better than not. Mother needs you. Wake. He felt himself pushed from behind, pushed up toward the light despite himself. Terry choked and gagged around the tube in his throat, and his arms flailed. "Grab him!" someone yelled. "I got him. Someone tie his leg down." Jesus Christ, what happened? I don't know. He was spasming and talking gibberish. Brain function? Wait. Oh, it's back. I don't know how, but it's back. Impossible. You think I don't know? Thank God, however it happened. Get that IV stabilized and give him a quarter grain of isoflurane on a float drip. Terry fought against the pain and confusion for another second until he felt a numbing coldness begin to spread through his mind. Then he was back in the darkness. This time it only felt like a few seconds before consciousness returned. He opened his eyes and panicked when he couldn't see anything. After a second, he began to make out details and a face. His mother was standing nearby, and she was crying. "Mom?" he said, his voice so raspy it didn't sound like his own. He coughed. Surprisingly, he wasn't in any pain, but instead felt all floaty. "Terry," his mom cried and came closer. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." The room was slowly coming into focus. He could see various medical equipment, as well as Dr. Janig and his assistants. As slowly as his focus was returning, he realized they were there to take care of him. "I was dead," he said. His mother collapsed, falling to her knees and nearly out of sight, completely racked by sobs and sounding of utter despair. "I'm so sorry. So sorry. I'm so sorry," she said repeatedly. "We really blew it." Terry turned his head to see Doc on the other side of his bed. "I can't remember what happened except I was dead." "We want to get you better before we go into it," Dr. Janig said, coming over to examine something Terry couldn't see. "Do you feel any pain?" "No," Terry said, "but I want to know what happened." He closed his eyes and tried to concentrate. His brain felt like it was full of cotton candy. An image came to him of looking through Templemere's dome from the outside into the moon pool room. His mother with a look of stunned horror on her face, and Doc running toward the moon pool, stripping off his jacket and yelling soundlessly. The memory cut off as suddenly as it had returned. "Sleep for now," the doctor said, and nodded to the side. Terry opened his mouth to complain, but couldn't manage to say anything before darkness took him back. "How you doing, Terry?" He opened his eyes and blinked. Dr. Janig was watching him a short distance away, holding a slate and glancing at its display every few seconds. "Tired of sleeping," he said. Terry didn't know how long they'd kept him asleep, only that he'd been out for some time. His back hurt in the way it did when he'd been in bed too long. Despite just waking up again, he yawned. "Why do I still feel tired?" "Your body's been busy healing," the doctor explained, again examining the slate. "What are you monitoring on the slate?" "Your blood chemistries. You see, we're trying to understand some things." "Like?" "Well, how you're alive, mostly." Terry nodded and felt something attached to his head. He also realized he was strapped to the bed. "I was dead, wasn't I?" "Yes," the doctor said. "Dr. Clark doesn't agree with us discussing this, but she's not your physician." He shrugged. "It was obvious to me, you know. Frankly, I'm amazed and want to maybe understand how you came back." "Can I have something to drink?" "Of course." Dr. Janig went to a nearby table and returned with a clear cup. There was a straw in it, and he put it to Terry's lips. He wasn't happy with being fed like a baby, but he was too thirsty to argue, and he took a big drink. The doctor pulled it back far sooner than Terry would have liked. "Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, shall we?" "First, tell me how long I've been in here, please," Terry said. My back is sore, and nowhere in the habitat looked this good in my memory. No, it wouldn't, the doctor said. You were injured 65 days ago. The air went out of Terry's lungs with a whoof. He tried to comprehend what he'd just been told. 2 months? He'd been hurt 2 months ago? What have I been doing all this time? You were in a coma with steadily decreasing brain functions. Dr. Janig turned the Tri-V on for his slate and showed a date-indexed recording of graphs. As time went by, the numbers steadily decreased until it reached 0. You reached 0 a day ago, which was when we decided to terminate life support. Let me die? Yes, he said. No brain functions. You were already dead. The fading of your higher brain functions was indicative of a cascade failure. Why? Terry said, not wanting to hear more about how they'd been going to let him die. Why was my brain failing? Do you remember what happened to you? Only being out with the orcas and something happened. His brow furrowed as he tried to remember. Dr. Janig nodded and tapped on his slate. Understandable. He stopped and locked eyes with him. Are you sure you want to see this? Terry nodded emphatically. Very well. He clicked on the slate, and the Tri-V came alive. He was watching himself swimming out from the dome, holding Pokale's dorsal fin. The view was from a security camera, and he wasn't perfectly in frame as he met with the orca pod and watched the reunion of Pokale with his mother and the rest of the pod. How's Pokale? He suddenly asked. As Dr. Janig had said, the calf had been without his care for months. The doctor paused the video. He's fine. The other high school-aged kids pitched in, helping feed him after you were hurt. He unpaused the video. Terry watched the orcas turn and swim into the darkness. After a moment, he spun around and swam back toward Templemere, moving slowly toward the bottom of the camera view. Then a flash of movement as a huge, sleek shape intercepted him, and he was out of frame. That was the hit I felt, Terry thought. The Tri-V replay switched to inside the moon pool room, and Terry watched his mom scream and point. Instantly, Doc burst into motion, running and stripping off his jacket as he went. The man's long frame translated into incredible strides as he leaped the last 3 meters into the water. Amazingly, he snatched the rebreather Terry had left while donning his helmet as he was jumping into the water. The view shifted again, this time to his own point of view just after he was attacked. The view was dizzying as he was dragged through the water. The rest played out in only a few seconds as he saw his hand appear with a dive knife and plunge it into the huge dual-iris eye. Incredible, he heard Dr. Janig say. I don't remember doing it, Terry said. Well, I couldn't have done it, not as injured as you were. How bad was it? Terry asked. Just wait a second, the doctor said and pointed at the replay. The monster let go and flashed away in a swirl of purple liquid. The view moved around and eventually down to show his leg. It looked like a filleted fish with massive flaps of flesh, rubber from the ravaged dry suit, and jets of dark red blood. Oh my God, he thought. Then the view looked up to show the entirety of the creature attacking him. It was longer than an adult orca, but not as thick. 3 sets of long flippers along its sides propelled it through the water. It had an incredibly long set of jaws, like an alligator, only thinner, and lined with shark-like teeth. The closest analog we can find to it on Earth was a dinosaur named Leopleurodon. It's one of the Cellroth transplants, an uhobo. They're a natural predator from their homeworld. The Cellroth now keep as some kind of right of adulthood. The doctor shrugged. We hadn't seen one yet, and with as much sea life as around here, and the bottlenoses venturing kilometers in all directions, we were pretty certain there weren't any here. I'm sorry to say, we were wrong. With all the fish and stuff, why did it attack me? Terry asked. The freeze frame of the uhobo sent a little shudder up his back, despite the slight numbing of the drugs they had him on. Doc thinks it's because of your suit lights. The lights on the dome were installed by the Cellroth, and likely a spectrum that doesn't attract the uhobo. Our suit lights are a different frequency, and that must have been what caused it. He unfroze the image, and the uhobo instantly noticed Terry with its remaining eye. He froze again. Notice how it spotted you right away when you looked up? Terry nodded. Anyway, he let the replay continue. We didn't have much left to work with. The uhobo shot toward the camera. Terry felt himself cringe. A split second later, 2 huge black and white shapes rocketed past him, jaws snapping. The orcas tore into the alien predator. Even from the horribly slewing images, Terry recognized Cray and Ki'i, the 2 dominant males from the superpod. He wanted to see more of the fight, but the fight began to fall out of frame, drifting lazily. The last image was of an arc of bright white teeth above and below, closing slowly in on him. Then the recording stopped. It started again a second later, showing Doc swimming through the moonpool lock with Terry in tow. His mother was screaming over and over as Doctors Orsage and Janig leaned over the pool to pull the limp boy out. As his ravaged leg cleared the end of the pool, he left a wash of bright red blood. His mother fainted, and the recording stopped for good. "Did an orca bring me back?" "Yes," the doctor replied. "Moloko brought you back. We got a couple of pieces of the uhobo, but like I said, there wasn't much left. They tore it apart." He chuckled. "They were pissed." "I'll say they were." Doc had come in at some point. Terry glanced at the old merc, who was in turn watching him carefully. "How you doing, kiddo?" "Surprisingly alive," he admitted. "You came out for me without a suit. Are you nuts?" "Do you remember what you did?" "No," Terry said. "I just saw the movie, though. It's a blockbuster. The uhobo was basically eating you alive, and you stabbed it in the freaking eye." He laughed and shook his head. "Goddamn, kiddo, what you did was the most badass thing I've seen in my entire life." Terry looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes, mostly because he felt tears beginning to flow. "I didn't do anything." "The hell you didn't." The man had walked up next to Terry when he wasn't looking. He felt the older man doing something and looked down. He was pinning something on the pajama top. It was an anchor with a trident through it and an eagle. "You deserve it more than I ever did. Where's Mom?" "She's sleeping right now," Doc said. "When you suddenly woke up after they turned off the life support, she kinda lost it. They gave her a sedative." "How messed up am I?" Terry asked. "We'll wait until his mother's here to explain," Dr. Janig said. "I don't think so," Doc countered. The doc gave him a stern look. "This kid took on a dinosaur with a damn knife. The orcas risked their own lives to save him. I think he can handle the truth right now." Dr. Janig frowned. "You tell him, or I will." "Very well," the doctor said. He reached over and removed the strap holding Terry's arms down. They still felt like they had lead weight on them, but he could move. "Thank you," he said. The doctor nodded and pulled the sheet down the rest of the way. The left leg of his pajama bottoms was empty from mid-thigh down. "We weren't set up for this level of trauma when you were injured," Dr. Janig said. "We had to use a tourniquet to save your life. By the time we could get a surgery set up, the leg was lost." Terry nodded. He'd known from the minute he saw the injury recorded in his own helmet camera, and the better image of them pulling him from the water. It was more than a movie. This was real life. Despite telling himself he wouldn't, he was quietly crying. Doc sat on the chair next to him and held his hand. "It's okay, kiddo. The hard part's over. You survived. We'll get through the rest together." When his mom came in an hour later, he was out of tears. He got to hold her while she cried and tell her it was okay, not her fault, and he was going to be fine. "I survived," he thought. "If I can kick a monster's ass, maybe I can do anything." That is the end of our reading for today. Thank you so much. Appreciate you taking your time to listen to us and hang out with us today. If you liked us, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share with your friends. We'll see you in a few days. Bye.